Bruce is a phenomenal artist, sculptor, collector, as you will see very shortly. We met 2016?
16. When I put on that headset, and I had never been anything in VR, and did that, and those shapes came out of my hand, that was like, oh, wow. Because one of the things, sculptures never had gesture. You know, painters can have gesture, but we've never, you can't have a gesture with steel or clay, or it just isn't there. But the idea that there's a tool, that the shapes come out of the movement of my own hand and wrist and arm, makes it very personal. And that's a quality that sculptors just have not had. And I cherish that.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's impressive to see what you've been able to produce with the tool. We're going to go through and check out your home a little bit, check out the studio,
Good.
and then sit down for a conversation. And
okay. I collect a really wide range of things, from, you know, antique scientific instruments like these, just things that interest me. I mean, I don't have a category.
I know that a lot of the stuff that you're collecting feeds into your artwork, and your work is such a in my opinion, from the layman's perspective, I think it's such a juxtaposition. You have very strong
that's important for us to talk about, because I'm visually connected more than intellectually connected to these things. So it's mainly how they look that grabs me. I'm interested in the stories too, but the first impression is just, does that object talk to me? Mm-hmm. And I look for that same kind of, I use the same expression with my own work, because as I've explained, I don't preconceive. And that's, for me, one of the strengths of Gravity Sketch, is that I can just play around with shapes. And as someone who doesn't pre-visualize but has to sort of play around and find something, then that's why the Gravity Sketch works so well. When I'm working in Gravity Sketch, I'm very messy. But there's shapes all over. They're just not on the floor. They're hanging around in space, and I grab them and stretch them and put them together. And the tools you use, you need to feel that they're comfortable to you, that the voice of that tool is something you want. Otherwise, you're just going to be fighting it.
Yeah.
But although I don't pre-visualize, one of the strengths I do have is that I know it immediately when it's right. So my process is more of exploration, and then when something talks back to me, then I say, okay, that's a keeper. But it's almost as though that they kind of reveal themselves to me more than I create them.
This is the giraffe leg. So I see a lot of craft in the inside of your house. I see bits and pieces of nature, like you have the dolphin. I'm not sure what that is, actually, but
that's an African ground crane.
Yeah. Okay. And then you have like a plethora of human skulls as well, and those are much different.
Yeah.
Because all these things are man-made, in my opinion. Like, obviously, this is what we're seeing, but those things are nature-made.
No, nature's best. I mean, we don't compete with nature. Nature is best. It's always right, but it stands as a goal, not something you're going to achieve, but it's always there as, well, we try hard.
What year did they erect this building?
It was built in 1912, 6 years after the earthquake, and they hadn't changed the code any. Okay. So this was built 6 years after the famous San Francisco earthquake, but no steel in it. We're slow learners. Now, after the Loma Prieta earthquake, there was funding, but so now there's steel in it. This is where we were living at the time of the earthquake. So, but also the benefit of living in the studio as the kids came along was less desirable.
Yeah.
So that was when I just built the house next door.
So this is the original Bruce Beasley studio.
Yeah.
And at the time you were quite young, right?
Yes,
You got this
yes.
place.
No, I was thrilled to have had this.
Now this is my favorite part of your studio. Just because this is, I don't even see this in the normal museum. And it's such a spectacular collection. I mean, from...
See, this is about the magic of nature. Because all the skulls have to do basically three main things. They hold the brain and protect the brain. They are the place where the food enters and air enters in most cases for most animals. Well, that's a lot of stuff to do when there's things as variable as a sea turtle, polar bear, warthog. All of these do that same thing, those three crucial things, but look at the variety.
There's like huge variety, lots of different forms and shapes. There's a lot of similarities in terms of their function. And then you have your sculpture table over there, which I always find it a little bit hard to draw the analogy from the
Well, because it's not direct. You see that I don't make things that look like skulls, but everything is visual input. I mean, I feel that I'm like a sponge, a whole life of input of rocks and people and machinery and animals. I mean, everything. Everything is a visual input that's building up a whole visual lifetime of vocabulary, visual vocabulary. And
then you tap into your brain to pull those out when you're working on your work.
But it's not. I'm interested in feels in my own work. Feels like, not looks like. I want to avoid resemblance because since I want to try to express things that are very elemental. Therefore, I don't want them to resemble anything. So these are like what final 3D prints that then say, yes, okay, those are going to be metal. And all the pieces up here, we'll see those across the way in different sizes of cast and fabricated metal.
So do you have the size in mind before you make the scaled version? Do you already know that this is going to be like
No.
7 foot tall or?
No, I don't. I don't know that ahead of time. Some of them say that they'd like to be bigger, and some of them say I'm good at the size I'm at. I let them tell me. Everything here has been done first in Gravity Sketch.
Oh wow. It's 100% Gravity
Sketch. Gravity Sketch was why I started doing VR. It isn't that I was doing VR and then I found Gravity Sketch. It was the foundry in England that said, we've seen something that we think is you, and you should fly over here and let us show you. I mean, that was a very big deal. And I trusted Runway enough that, it's not casual to just get a trip to England and fly off and all, but he was someone that I think I had a lot of respect for. And if he said he thought that was unique and he saw me in that, I got on a plane and that was, then we met in downtown London.
Yeah, I remember. This is Piccadilly area.
Yeah.
And that was 2016,
I think. It was real early.
Yeah, we just started.
The way it is right for me is a way that nothing else was before. So this got me into computers way before gravity check. But this, what interests me with this style was what happens when you take simple shape that has almost no emotional feeling and they start intersecting each other. And then what happens is you get these new shapes that are the result of the intersecting of the more simple shapes. And that interested me very much. But since I don't pre-visualize, I needed to do this, but change my mind. I wanted to say, okay, that's interesting. What if I rotate this block 6 degrees that way? Well, that meant making a whole new model.
Right.
So that was what got me into computers, and that was 1980. This was the first time that I was then working on things on a screen not my hand could touch. And that was a big, difficult step. But it did what it did really well. So but it took away the first physical connection with the work. It was the first time that my hands were not touching and getting dirty on what was going to be the final thing. It introduced this new layer called the computer, and I didn't like almost any part of that except that it let me play around with these shapes. So that's a lot of what technology does. You gain something and you lose something. But so it's, again, you have to pick the tools that do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have to change the tool and redesign the tool.
And when you were exploring this kind of digital workflow, I mean, 80s, not many sculptors were doing that.
No, I was the first sculptor to do that. So for someone that doesn't pre-visualize, I have to really prioritize any tool that gives me flexibility in changing my mind.
So now we're going to go from here. I'd like to go from here, that rough kind of, you almost had to cut each of these sections out and tape them together, to now your printing facility. I'd love to see how you now work in a much more direct way, I'd imagine, because you send it straight to print.
So all these are the printer.
Yeah.
And the printer's right in here if you want to see it.
I don't think you see many 85-year-olds who are able to.
No, and I'm
fully
literally
understand service.
running it, and I'm putting the stuff in it, and
I think, your adoption of technology is incredible. What's the highlight piece for you in here? I know it's very hard to pick one that's really stands out.
You know.
They're all pretty important to you.
Yes. No. That there aren't any favorites.
I mean, I guess the one that you can't help but draw attention to is this, really large cross section. Probably one of the tallest in here.
Yeah.
What kind of made that one the one that you're like, okay, this is the right scale?
No, that was pre-gravity sketch, and that was a big deal to expand it. But I wanted to get some bigger ones with this imagery. But that one is pre-gravity sketch, and I mean it isn't as though you'd say, oh, it's obviously different. But the grace in making it was clumsy and difficult, whereas with gravity sketch, it's graceful and smooth.
Right.
The only ones here that are not gravity sketch, well, of course, are the cubic ones, but also these were pre-gravity sketch, but you can see why Gravity's Check was so great, because this was very complicated to do. What I had to do to make these was because there wasn't a program that let me just pull this around the way Gravity's Check does. I had to determine a spline with points in space. But I couldn't just do that. So to make a graceful series of points in space that describe a gentle curve, if you're just putting points in space, it's very tedious, because you don't get them, you know, they don't necessarily make a spline. So you want to get those. So hopefully this looks very graceful the way it does coming out of Gravity's Check, but this was a real pain in the ass to make, because I was determining points in space and then having to adjust all those points so that they made these gentle curves.
The rotation.
So I hope that they feel very graceful, but they were very difficult to make, whereas that in Gravity Sketch is just a dream. Mm-hmm. So that was pre-Gravity Sketch, and I'm proud of the pieces, but it didn't have the grace of making them that it does with Gravity Sketch.
Right. I'm keen to understand a little bit more on the manufacturing process, because many of these you had to piece together and hide seams, and there's a lot of technology, but also craft.
Okay, so now I'm going to brag about China, because we don't make these here.
Okay.
And these are done in China, and they are just look at how the inside edges are very hard. A beautiful inside edge. So I now, and originally I was sending them a 3D model, and now they print their own 3D models, or they use a lot of 5-axis milling machines out of high-density foam to make a positive. Maybe not this full scale, but I have a feeling that they probably make maybe a 1/5 scale in high-density foam. But they're getting it dead on, and I have to honestly say, Albert and I, we think we're pretty good with metal. We could not make that. I just want to live and work here.
Yeah. And it's been decades now.
Decade. Well, I was 65 years.
Wow. Yeah, your institution.
65 years.
Your institution, the neighborhood. Most neighbors still know you?
Oh, you know, I'm probably the oldest one in the neighborhood now. It's really funny, because, I mean, it just seems yesterday when I was just a newcomer. Anyway, it's been a real interesting 65 years.
Oh, it's great. It's an awesome thing that you've built here as well. The houses, the buildings. It feels like this little corner of West Oakland that no one knows exists except for those who come. Great. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your space. Every time we come, even if I'm not with the team, you still take the team around, and I've actually recommended people to come and visit you here, and you've shown them, and you've been very hospitable. I really appreciate that. We've talked so many times when I come. We always talk about technology, your practice, how things have evolved, your perspective on the art world, and I'd love to kind of capture all of that in a few questions. And I want to keep it completely real. We don't need to pontificate on anything, but just, sharing some of the things that you share with me in a very matter-of-fact way.
Sure.
So I have a few questions. The first one is probably a very heavy question, because there's so many avenues this can go down, but you've been practicing for over 6 decades. What has that evolution looked like and felt like to you? I know we've seen some of your early work in the kind of walkthrough, and now we're seeing some of the most recent work. But you've also done things like the submarine capsule that you've done. There's such a breadth of work.
The bathyspheres was my step into science. And when I did the invention of the cast acrylic, then the undersea community came to me, and that led to the bathyspheres. let's not get into that today because
Sure.
it's really another story. But so okay, wait a minute. So how do we where were we at?
Just the evolution over
Yeah,
the 60 years and kind of
yes,
where you started to where you are today.
yes. Well, so I got out of Berkeley, did not stay for an MFA, and then the first question was go to New York, and I came to the conclusion that for fame and fortune, I'd be better off in New York, but for terms of making the work, I was better to stay in on the West Coast because just the working conditions. Um, so the work has always been the priority for me. So if I could have made better sculpture in New York, I'd have gone to New York. But the ability to work outside, to have inexpensive studio space and all was so compelling that it was worth it to me to give up the fame and fortune aspect and just prioritize the ability to make the best work I could.
Yeah. And I guess pre-computer and post-computer, if we kind of go back into that time period, what was the work like before you started to digitize your workflow?
The work immediately previous to the computer was cast aluminum from shapes that I was cutting up styrofoam packing cases in just slicing them up with a big bandsaw and in effect making scrap. I wasn't paying any attention to when I was cutting it. I was just making huge piles of just slices of styrofoam, and that then I was assembling. In a way, you can see that it was like Gravity Sketch in the sense I was in effect making myself a vocabulary of scrap objects that alone didn't have any feeling, but then I was going to go back and join them in ways to try to discover a sculpture. So in certain ways, you can see that's analogous to the Gravity Sketch. That again, I don't go into Gravity Sketch and say I'm going to make a sculpture. I go into Gravity Sketch and I make shapes that interest me. And then those shapes as individuals, but still within Gravity Sketch, I'm arranging and putting them together. But again, I'm making pieces that I then rearrange. So it's when I'm in Gravity Sketch, I'm not making a single sculpture. I'm making shapes that interest me and then rearranging them again within Gravity Sketch.
Right.
But it's not like I just sit down and in one gesture make a sculpture.
Yeah. And you've been exploring technology, at least the digital kind of creation, since really the emergence of this discipline or the emergence of this technology.
Yeah, that's right. It's 1980.
Yeah. And you've touched so many different softwares. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. How has your evolution in software, how has that process also shaped your art? Because some of the cubic stuff that you showed was really slow to make, I imagine.
It is. It's hard to generalize. The point, though, with the technology is it's too easy to fall into a trap of technology. So the difficulty with is to keep it that the technology is working for you, you're not working for the technology. And that takes a constant awareness of yourself of is this really working for me or am I jumping through its hoops? And that has to be something that we really have to pay attention to, because the technology won't tell you, hey, you've taken me as far as you're going to go. That has to be your own choice. So it is a constant evaluation of the technology. Is this existing one working a good tool for me? Do I need another one? Do I need to find a brand new tool, which was what Gravity Sketch did, or do I want to find some ways to expand things like in Rhino, but not very well? So there's a constant looking, or let's say trying to be aware of other programs, but also not trying to go too far. You'll find you'll go down the rabbit hole of trying every single program that's out there and learning all the different interfaces. And so it's complicated, but the main thing you have to be aware of is it working for me or am I working for it?
Right. And how do you extend that same ideology over to the 3D printing space? Because there's inherent limitations in 3D printing.
Yes, but what the 3D printer does is so important because, for instance, I can make a shape in gravity, a piece in gravity gravity sketch, that I can make a small model overnight and see it the next day as a desktop model. Well, that's really great. I mean, because it's never on the screen fully the way you're going to see it three-dimensionally. So to be able to use Gravity Sketch, make a quick model on the 3D printer, and then maybe I go back in Gravity Sketch and make some changes, because it's always different when it's physically in the 3D world.
Yeah, I want to touch on that because VR seems to offset the need to go physical, and there's an importance in physicality from a tactility perspective, but maybe we're still not, the technology's still not there yet where you can look at something in VR and say, yeah, I can feel that.
You know, it's interesting because people are constantly telling me that, gee, you know, it's great. You can have an exhibition on a thumb drive. I don't want to do that. I have no intention of showing the work in VR. I am a committed sculptor to the physicality of metal, stone, and to me that physical presence is deeply important. I think that's kind of what makes sculptures. We like the fact that these objects are fully experiential haptic world. They're a part of the world that we live in. You can bump into them. They can. I mean, they're part of our world. It's never been clear to me, even when talking to painters, whether they view that is that painting an object that exists in our world, or is it a window into an imaginary world? Well, sculpture, there's no question about that. It's in the world we're in, and I want it to be. And I think that's what it has to do with the presence of physicality is, I think, crucial to sculptures. It's what makes us sculptors.
Yeah. And if we stay on that physical theme for a moment, the theme of our event this year is around craft and the digital space. And so I really like this balance between physical, this output that you have, and this digital craft. And I feel like there's also a physical craft that needs to be involved. And so how do you bring these two worlds together where it feels human, it feels like it's a real discipline, not something that I programmed with a few numbers in the screen and then send it out somewhere to kind of make verbatim?
Is that a question? Do you mean when I'm using it in Gravity Sketch or after?
I think the whole journey, because there has to be this element of the human hand especially in your work, right? You're not making a perfect box. You know, you're making like very fluid shapes, and then these need to be captured by artisans in Asia that can like mimic with the material as best they can. You can't 3D print this stainless steel sculpture, right? So there's this digital aspect that should enhance the physical aspect is what I'm assuming.
Well, I mean, the Gravity Sketch didn't make it easier for me to be a sculptor. It made it possible for me to make a new vocabulary of work that felt very personal and to me and very rewarding. But all of these steps lead to complications. So the magic of Gravity Sketch is not that it was easier to make sculpture. it allowed me a vocabulary that was not available to me without it, and a vocabulary that felt particularly personal and direct in a way that I'd never had, and that seemed very precious.
Yeah, interesting. And I could definitely see the humanity in a lot of your work. I can see that someone literally did this with the.
Well, I hope so, because, you know, again, it goes back to this feels like, not resembles. And I definitely want the work to feel like, but not to look like.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get some wonderful feedback that tells me that, at least for some people, it's a bullseye. And, you know, I don't feel that you're ever going to have a case where your work, sculpture, communicates with everybody. You're just not. I just don't. I don't view that my job is to try to make something that everyone will like. I hope that if I'm honest with myself, and if I now make a piece that really talks to me, then in general, they also talk to enough others that I have a sense that it communicates.
So a big theme that we're seeing in recent years is the adoption of AI. And this is helping expand creativity to a certain extent, or helping explore different ideas and, you know, stretch what's possible. As a very tech-forward person yourself, what's your take on this new space? Have you dabbled in it? What's your feelings around artificial intelligence?
You're talking about the immersive VR?
No, artificial intelligence.
Oh, AI.
Yeah.
No. Well, I think with AI, we start with the first word, artificial. And that to me is everything, because for me, art can only be within the human experience. It doesn't have any external to humans. Unlike science, if we're ever with sentient beings from somewhere else, they will understand the relationship of a circle and the diameter and the circumference. They'll understand all of that, but art will be meaningless to them, because art comes only has value as a human experience. And to me, that's why it's important and wonderful, and has been with us through the entire human career. But it doesn't have an analogy or an existence outside of human. And that's, to me, why it's so important.
Yeah.
It's not science. It's not recording history. It's not fact. Art is about human emotions.
But what I find interesting, especially about your work, is that all those things, science and humanity and nature, all blend into your inspiration.
Yes.
And so I'd love to ask the question really around like your greatest influence, your greatest inspiration, greatest influence to your work.
Nature. Nature. Always nature. It's all in nature.
Yeah.
And nature's always best. We can't emulate it, but we can be taught by it. We can be inspired. We can be awed. But it's there as basically, it's like, okay, good try, kid. Keep working.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. I mean, I can definitely feel that there's elements of nature in your work, and especially the kind of really gestural pieces that you're kind of trying to see something sometimes. Like this piece over here, I always felt like it's a human running, and I don't know if I don't know if that was what you were looking for. But
I like that, because there's no way you can say that it's that by resemblance. So if it gets that by feeling, then that's very rewarding to me, because that's exactly what I'm hoping to do, is feels like, not looks like.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. Yeah. Last question from me, and then we'll take some from the audience here. emerging artists or existing artists that want to get into that digital space. You've been doing it for decades, long before I was born, and you've played with almost every tool that I've mentioned to you in the past. And so, these are very daunting tools to tackle, or very difficult to say, I'm going to change the way I've been doing things successfully and learn something new. What advice do you have for someone that wants to start getting into that digital workflow and adopt these tools in their workflow?
Well, I try to explain to younger artists, because I've lectured a lot about technology, and I think it's really important that you not look for imagery in the technology. So searching for a style in the technology is kind of a fool's errand, because it has to be from you. And so what we call a style is really when an artist limits what they're working with to a certain area. It's a self-limit. But that style, or what you're saying I'm going to focus on, has to come from you inside. That shouldn't be given to you by the technology. That there is, the technology always has its voice, but the artist needs to be in charge of that voice. And if they're not, then they're going to be sort of just bullied by the technology. Then the technology will be having the artist jump through the technology's steps rather than the artist driving it. It's very important that the artist is not just hoping to find something interesting in the technology.
Right. Well, we have a few people online.
Okay.
And some interesting questions have come up. I'm just going to pull up my laptop here and see if we can. Feel free to ask questions, you all. So one question came up during the tour was, are there any places in the UK where we can see your work? And I think a broader question would also be, because this is an international event that we're hosting here, where in the world can we see your work? What major cities, what galleries?
Okay, well, there's a big piece in there's a number of them in China, but it's still a big one at the Olympic Park in Beijing. There's being right now a very big one made in Shanghai. The largest one is a big piece just down the peninsula here, the one that's 70 feet high at the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. And then there's a one that's 100 feet high in Monterrey, Mexico. Downtown Oakland. Around, Berkeley has a number of them on the campus, and a number of the universities. Stanford has one on the campus. Downtown Oakland, in front of City Hall, they're around all over.
Yeah. You just did your 60-year retrospective.
Yes.
And where was that hosted? Because I know
that was
during
at
the pandemic,
something called Grounds for Sculpture in New Jersey.
Okay.
One of the biggest sculpture parks in the world, and they're very nice, because they have a lovely big exhibition building, and then a lot of grounds. So there was outdoor and indoor pieces, and it was a great privilege to have that exhibition, and I was thrilled by it.
Nice. One of the viewers was particularly interested in the small maquettes that you 3D print out. All of those are printed, or have you tried different technologies to kind of bring your smaller versions of the sculptures to life?
No, I've done smaller ones before I was doing 3D printing.
Okay. What processes were you using in the past?
Just making it in wax, and then having a mold made, and
okay.
Just traditional.
Would you use wire and then just shape it around the wire, or how did you build that out?
Well, or just modeling, or sometimes a little bit of cardboard and wax, right, and then you make a mold from that.
Right. Interesting. And I guess 3D printing just accelerated that tremendously.
Yeah. But I don't. I don't show and exhibit the 3D printed. Well, I had one show of 3D printed work, and that was because Autodesk wanted that, and I agreed that it was time to say maybe 3D printing can be looked at as a process itself, but I put that as a question mark. And so I showed had a show at Autodesk of the 3D printer work, and then those pieces were also shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Beijing, and at the Art Museum at Santa Clara University. We showed the 3D printed pieces. So that was a way to try to say the world of sculpture ought to be aware of this technology. And of course, that's leading to, I've been watching very seriously the metal 3D printing.
Right.
It's still right now, I've tried some, it's too expensive. But that, to me, in potential, that's one that I'm still keeping an eye on, because that's very interesting.
Right.
To avoid the whole this whole other steps and just go directly to 3D printing. But it's not there now.
Yeah. Okay. It's how was that received, by the way? Were other artists and sculptors pretty interested in this new approach? And
you know, it's interesting. There's not. I've heard stories about the Cedar Bar in New York in the 50s, when artists were really talking about things between them. As maybe a bit of romanticism about that. But to be honest with you, there's not a lot of we're not. Sculptures are all spread around, so we don't really have a very good mechanism for feedback from each other. And then there's also this thing of style and professional standing and all that can get a little bit complicated about getting response from work from colleagues.
Yeah, I understand. Another question we have is, one of the viewers is interested in the kind of environment that you work within. You have music, what kind of lighting,
No, I don't. I don't listen to anything when I'm working. I like music, but I don't. I don't want another input when I'm trying to dance with shapes. I don't want any other input.
We didn't actually tour, at least not this visit, we didn't tour the space where you have VR set up, like your whole VR setup. But is it the same room?
It's in the room where the computers are.
Yeah. There's still some inspiration you have in there, which I found interesting. You had some.
Well, I have a full human skeleton in that room, and that is to constantly remind me about nature and about what I call structure. Because without the bones, we're just a bunch of floppy flesh. So when we see a person, I'm looking at you, I'm seeing skin and hair and all that. But without the bones, we're just ugh. So I have that full human skeleton hanging in my where the creative work is done, as a reminder of nature and structure and that stuff.
Yeah. And do you still keep some of the printed versions of your work? Because I remember last time we were there, I think you had some work in progress that was like half printed. That was still in that room as well. Do you reference that stuff while you're working with the digital version or the digital equivalent?
I'm not quite understanding.
So in the room the room where you work, been there a couple of times, you have sometimes you'll have like half printed things or like things that are just printed from VR.
Yeah.
Do you often switch back and forth, like, lift up the headset, look at the 3D printed, but then look at the digital version?
Oh, I see.
How's that influence?
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that kind of.
Yes,
back
definitely.
and forth.
But stepping in and out. Yeah.
Another question here is one of the viewers asked, have you ever made any like kinetic work or moving sculpture?
You know, that's interesting. I No, I haven't. I've had two very close friends that were kinetic artists. One was the great George Rickey. He was a dear friend, and I had great admiration for Ricky's work. He brought to it something that was very hard for kinetic. He got work that didn't repeat because it was driven by air movements, and he had multiple joints in it. So it wasn't that it just turned on one axis; it would turn on multiple axes, depending on how strong the air currents were.
Right.
So that brought a very real natural sense to it, that it was responding to differently to different air currents. Anything that repeats itself doesn't appeal to me at all. So all of the kinetic work that's motor driven, it doesn't interest me because it ends up repeating.
Okay, understood. There's another question here, and it's maybe more on the technology side. One of the viewers is asking if you're familiar with there's like a sintering 3D printing technology for metal, which you explored, but there's also a version where you have the CNC carving alongside that. So you can 3D print and carve in a similar fashion. Have you explored that technology?
No, I haven't, because to me, the 3D printing is fulfilling my need for what it does. It's a satisfactory solution.
Right. So when the time comes that maybe there's a need for that, you'll explore the next bit.
The thing is about all of the axis, it's all that undercut stuff, and of course the whole point of 3D printing is it can print any shape. So for me, it's just a better technology than the machining's ever going to be.
Right. Is there any technology that you haven't had your hands on yet that you want to explore, that you're kind of eager to jump on?
Huh. Not that I'm aware of, but I'm always open. Are you aware of anything that I might not be?
On the fabrication side, not quite yet. There's some advancements that we talk periodically, or we'll send emails back and forth on like new headsets, new visuals coming out. I know you've been really pushing for having higher resolution.
Yes.
That's a bit of a challenge right now because no one's really producing that level except for Apple's
device.
Yes,
I know. But for those of us who want to use VR and Gravity Sketch in particular as the step for making something that comes out of VR, then the resolution issue is really important.
Mm-hmm. And we're working on some cloud computing stuff that would help with that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, some of those things. Any other, it looks like the chat has slowed down a little bit. Oh, maybe. Okay, another question. How many iterations are you exploring per sculpture?
How many? Oh, you mean additions?
Yeah, so if you're making a sculpture, how many iterations would you make of that in print before you say, okay, that's the one I want to take it forward?
Oh, I see. It varies completely. I mean, in terms of how many 3D prints I do in the process of, well, no, it varies from ones that I keep working on it and they just peter out to ones that sometimes were right first. So there's no generalization.
Yeah, understood. There seems to be a budding artist in the chat here who would like to start combining sculpture and VR. Want to know if you had any suggestions for him, how to get started.
To combine sculpture and VR?
Yeah. Maybe similar process to yours, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, just get some VR and just start. I mean, for me, the whole thing was VR was realizing that you could use VR to make things that then get made outside in the real haptic world. That was crucial to me because I didn't want to use VR where it would have to stay in VR. So, it, so what was this question again?
Any advice for him who's going to adopt VR into his process?
Well, the point is why. I mean, it for me, it was a bullseye for my particular way of working. But again, it goes back to, is the VR going to be something that's going to improve your working relationship with your work? Or are you looking to solve some of your maybe not being very happy with your work with a new technology? Then I would say not the second, because I think looking for a vocabulary in the technology is a mistake. You'll tend to get superficial things that way. So if you don't know where you want it to, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying it's dangerous to look for a style in the technology.
Understood. There's another question here. Bruce, can you explain a little bit about your work of your foundation to and commitment to equity? You have it sounds like there's a foundation.
Yes.
For commitment to equity.
Yes. Well, the way things are set up, on my death, all the studios become are left to a foundation that's going to run it as a public museum.
Okay.
And I want to have my work here, but also one of the studios we would aim for that be for other sculptures. I would want the foundation to be a constantly showing other sculptures.
Nice. Well, it doesn't look like you're slowing down in your work either. You're often still out there in the studio making work.
You know, I consider myself to be an incredibly lucky person. I have a strong calling. I found it early, and I've been doing it ever since I was basically a teenager. And boy, what a lucky guy I've been. I found this thing at 19, and it's been my life since. And it's rewarded me, and it's let me have I don't know. I just feel very fortunate and grateful that I've had this 65 years of being able to pursue a shape that sings to me. I mean, it comes right down to that, and I'm just grateful that was possible.
Yeah, we're grateful that you're exploring the tool to such extent as well. Looks like there's another question here. Gravity Sketch is collaborative. There's a collaborative aspect to Gravity Sketch. You can bring other people into the environment with you. Have you ever explored working together?
That aspect of it has no interest to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, no. I'm very, very private about when I'm creating the work. And I have no interest in collaboration or anything like that. So I understand that could be very interesting to people, and I think that's great, but not for me.
Interesting. How about when you're talking with the fabricators in Asia? You mentioned you've flown to China a few times, and it's quite a long trip. It's quite busy when you land. Could you ever imagine a scenario where you're walking someone through the details of how to fabricate your work, but totally digital?
No. You know, the thing is, when you go to a fabricator, the question is, can they do what you want done? But if you're having to tell them how to do it, then they're not going to be the right fabricator. Now, I'm just fascinated. I asked them to send me pictures for all of these pieces when they're being fabricated. And it's astounding to me. They're very craft intensive. And I'm very grateful that there's some place that will do that. These pieces, there is no one in Europe or the U.S. that I could have these pieces made of, even at any price. The skill set is just simply not there.
Right.
And so I'm very grateful that I have found this ability to have these made someplace, and the quality is as so it the company I've worked with, they've improved the quality over time, and now it is I have it's as good as I can. I'm not I'm not going to use the word perfect, but I am very, very happy with the quality I get.
Yeah, that's awesome. Two more questions here. One question is around the two-dimensional series, your series of work. It looks like it was inspired by Gravity Sketch. Where were these kind of what inspired you, and how did you bring these to life?
Those, yes, the 2D work definitely came from Gravity Sketch, but it was through a funny step of I'm not even easy to describe it, but there's a point where I was isolating as 2D files some of the faces of some of the curves. In other words, and then isolating those, and they were interesting to start looking at those as like, yes, like strokes on paper. So, but again, since I don't pre-visualize, I got a big printer and was just printing up a lot of what I would basically call the strokes, but they were in Gravity Sketch, but I was then treating them as 2D, not 3D. And so then I was cutting those up after printing them on the printer and making these 2D arrangements for the wall pieces. And that was very interesting. It was very much analogous to working in the 3D. And I had just a bit, that big white table, and I just played with these things around on it, and very, very analogous to the 3D work.
Yeah, it's the first time that you really pushed into that 2D space.
Yes, because the thing is that if I have to start with a piece of paper or a canvas, I just freeze up because it's starting with a limitation. And since I don't know where it's going to go, if a piece of paper or a canvas is saying to me, "This is the limit," well, then I don't want to do it because I don't know where it's going to go. So that's so what.
Oh, it's the first time you've done it. I found it really interesting that you kind of explored.
I'm always looking for as much freedom and flexibility as I can have. And if I have to start with a limitation, then I'm tended to not want to do it.
Understood. Well, last question. You've been doing this for 65 years, from the age of 19, actually. How has your view of the work changed over the time as you've gotten older?
I don't know how to answer that. My view of the work. All I can do is try to make work that talks to me and then hope it talks to other people. When it doesn't, it's okay because I didn't start with the goal. I don't make sculpture because I'm trying to communicate. I make sculpture because I have to make sculpture, and then I hope that they communicate. But I don't vary what I do by what the work is, how the response is. Because that's how would I use that in the future? So all I can do is, my only standard is, does it talk to me? And I can't use any other valuation, because what else would I use? Would I go around and ask people, is this a good one or is that a good one? So you just have to have a sense yourself that that's one is good enough or not. But if it really talks to me, then it's a piece, and it gets finished, and sometimes gets made in several scales. But the whole evaluation never changes from, does it talk to me?
Right. Bruce, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad that we could do this finally.
Well, I'm glad to help, and I'm happy to have to go on public record for what Gravity Sketch has been as a wonderful tool for me.
Awesome. We appreciate you. Thanks so much.